The YouTube algorithm likes outrage, right? Well, let me show you something that will get any self-respecting DBD player's blood boiling. I was scrolling Twitter the other day, big mistake, I know, and I saw one of the worst balanced takes I've seen in a while. It was this kid giving an interview and out of nowhere he just starts yapping. Get a load of this guy.
Last time you said that you were excited to play Springtrap in Dead by Daylight. Who do you main? Who's your hunter?
I'm playing a Xenomorph.
Oh,
right
that's
now,
a good choice.
But
yeah.
I used to play Demogorgon, but I'm just waiting for Springtrap to
Yeah.
come. Yeah.
I wondered if you've had a chance yet.
Yeah. He's overpowered, man.
Yeah.
I moved back to Alien.
Yeah, nice.
Although in this instance, I'm definitely willing to forgive him. I'm pretty sure he's been busy lately. Because this is Alfie Williams, a 15-year-old actor from Newcastle, but you might know him as Spike, the main character of 28 Years Later and its recent sequel, The Bone Temple. And he's a Dead by Daylight player, as we discovered last year when he was interviewed as part of the promo for the first film. Alfie's been quite upfront with his appreciation for Dead by Daylight. He talked about it to IGN last year and in an interview with 1883. But more recently, Alfie floated the idea of his character Spike coming to Dead by Daylight.
Anybody pushing to get a 28 Years Later collab for
I'd
Dead by
love that,
Daylight?
man. I'd love that. I know they bring Stranger Things in, so they can't have minors in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So
Maybe you. It could happen, yeah. I feel like Kelson would be a really good survivor as well. Yeah.
Well, if you dangle a video opportunity like that in front of me, how am I going to resist? Today we'll be examining this landmark of British horror, this staple of zombie fiction, and looking at it through the lens of the silly palette looping game we all know and love. We're trying to understand what makes the series and its characters stand out from the crowd, distill which characters could make suitable survivors or even killers for a hypothetical 28 Years Later chapter, and wrapping up as usual with a power concept for my chosen killer. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to 28 Years Later, and the potential and problems of bringing Danny Boyle's vision of post-apocalyptic Britain to Dead by Daylight as a licensed chapter. Before we get in though, I want to address spoiler territory for the 28 Days series of movies. This video will contain unfiltered spoilers for 28 Days Later and 28 Years Later. We'll also be acknowledging the existence of Weeks, but that film's so forgettable it's basically an afterthought. Nevertheless, I'd recommend at least watching the original 28 Days Later and 28 Years Later before watching this video if you care about potential spoilers. Plus, Weeks isn't a bad watch either. But the new movie, The Bone Temple, is in cinemas right now, so there'll be big spoiler alerts for anything surrounding The Bone Temple, which you should definitely go and see, by the way. I saw it recently and it's phenomenal. I'll give you timestamps when they come up, but you should definitely still go and watch The Bone Temple. Nia DaCosta and Alex Garland absolutely smashed it. So let's start off by talking about zombies. When I say the word zombies, what do you tend to think of? Is it modern depictions of brutal survivalism like The Walking Dead, or the hammy classics like the works of George A. Romero? Maybe self-aware zomcoms like Zombieland and Shaun of the Dead? Whatever it may be, the idea of the zombie has been a staple in popular culture for decades, and while the cultural idea of a walking corpse has taken many shapes in different parts of the world, what we know as a zombie movie today usually puts its monsters into one of two categories. You've got the Shamblers, your Night of the Living Dead style, brain sort of zombies, often explicitly undead, whether they're given a scientific explanation or a supernatural one. Kinds of things you'd see in The Walking Dead or Dead Rising. But there's a second type of zombie that gained massive pop culture success, one that's fallen out of favour in recent years but was dominant at least for a time in the 2000s and 2010s. The Sprinters. The Sprinters are as fast as humans, typically more feral than the Shamblers and far more often have a scientific explanation behind their origins. You see them in films like Wreck, Train to Busan and Pontypool, inasmuch as those are more like conversationalists. And even though we all know that they're zombies, they're never, ever, ever called zombies. Unless they are. All of these traits can be most cleanly observed in the British horror classic 28 Days Later. Released in 2002, it's often misattributed as the first time that we had fast zombies in media, but House of the Dead got there first in 1997. Hell, even Resident Evil zombie dogs came before then. What 28 Days did was bring the trope outside of the world of gaming into the mainstream and entirely recontextualise what a zombie movie was like in the 2000s without ever saying the word zombie. And it did so by examining the infected, as a symbol of social malaise and domestic panic. Late 90s and 2000s Britain was a culture of fear, but not in the same way you might describe a culture of fear today. Obviously today, social media algorithms fan anxiety and fear, but 20-30 years ago, these fears largely came from institutional places, passed down from the highest levels of government and eagerly disseminated by the press. The death of Princess Diana rattled a load of Brits and started a wave of conspiracy theories. There was so much paedophile mania that Brass Eye parodied the scare culture in one of the funniest TV specials ever made.
Why can we no longer think of the British Isles without the word pedof in front of them?
And of course there were the health scares. Mad cow disease, foot and mouth. The AIDS crisis was still fresh in people's memories, and at the turn of the millennium, Andrew Wakefield was still a widely accredited doctor, so the anti-vaccine movement was inspiring more fear among the British public than we'd ever seen before or since. 28 Days Later's approach to zombies, the infected, used them as an emblem for this social rot that was seeping into the British consciousness. Not driven by superstition, but by science. Not dead beings, but living ones, trapped in an all-consuming rage as they tear each other apart. They truly were zombies of a modern age, especially of a modern Britain. The creative choices surrounding the portrayal of the infected was just one of the tools director Danny Boyle and writer Alex Garland used to make 28 Days Later as haunting as possible, by grounding it as closely to reality as possible. Anyone who's watched the film will remember possibly its most iconic scene, with Jim emerging into a London completely devoid of people, devoid of the life that characterises our teeming capital. Shooting this shot practically in the middle of London without any major CGI or expensive replica sets was not easy, but literally gives you perspective on how 28 Days Later doesn't just take place on a fantastical world overrun by a contagion, but on our world turned upside down by a grave threat that neither we nor Jim truly understand. The use of consumer-grade video cameras, popular music choices, and landmarks like Westminster Bridge, Piccadilly Circus, and the M1 all present us ideas and images that a general audience might recognise, only to recontextualise them in ways that make us uneasy, tense, or even just depressed to see what's happened to the nation we know and love. The sobering realism of 28 Days Later will provide something unique to Dead by Daylight, because while we've had post-apocalyptic or zombie fiction in the game before, it's all been very Americanized, even when it's been Japanese. 28 Days represents a very different flavour from that, even if it's cut from the same cloth. Resident Evil is obvious. RE is a game series focused on spectacle and the agency of its individual protagonists to shape the world, which is about as far from 28 Days Later as you can get. But the difference between the worlds of 28 Days and The Walking Dead are much more nuanced, especially because Kirkman wrote the Walking Dead comic book at about the same time 28 Days Later released and reawakened the public's interest in zombie fiction. The Walking Dead is a character drama. It's a soap opera. It uses the social collapse of a zombie apocalypse as a background to tell a story about relationships, new and old, about the role of fathers and sons, lovers and enemies. That's why the Walking Dead spin-off media we've had has all been generally linked back to the main show and its characters. Those characters are what gets the viewers coming back. Daryl and Rick and Michonne and the rest are why we keep tuning into The Walking Dead. But if The Walking Dead is a soap opera, 28 Days Later and its sequels are a nature documentary, introducing us to a whole new ecosystem where the remaining healthy humans have to share their space with a large section of society that's devolved into animals, and how those healthy humans reassert themselves at the top of the food chain. A few people, like Dr. Kelson and Years, have adapted well to the New World Order caused by the Rage virus, and seem to have not just survived, but found hope, preserved knowledge, or restored optimism to a world that seems so devoid of any of these things. Others, like Major West in Days or Jimmy Crystal in the Bone Temple, take advantage of the opportunities the post-apocalypse presents to indulge in selfishness, cruelty, or megalomania, because as long as they can keep the infected at bay, nobody else is going to stop them. Most, I would argue, reside firmly in the middle, earnestly trying to adjust to this new world, but still regularly making mistakes, because life under the Rage virus did not come with a rulebook or any second chances. We see characters we're rooting for, like Jim in Days, Spike in Years, or basically everybody in Weeks, making decisions that we as an audience can see are unwise, but in their specific contexts, where the life experience they've had so far isn't going to help them, they really are just doing their best. But whether you're a sociopath, a saint, or just a citizen, anyone living in the British Isles once the Rage virus sets in is by definition a survivor, and would bring something new to Dead by Daylight by showing us a survivor from a world where the human race is no longer the apex predator. But which stands out as the best pick? 3 immediate options are obvious to me. 3 characters who define what it is to be a survivor of the Rage virus in their own ways, and that'd be massively popular choices among 28 Days fans. A few years ago, this question would only have one reasonable answer: Jim, played the original movie by the brilliant Cillian Murphy in his breakout role. Jim starts off 28 Days Later as much a fish out of water as we the audience are going into it. He's a man out of time, waking up from his coma 28 days into the end of the world, in a manner that will remind some viewers of a certain Ricky Dicky Doo-Dah Grimes. But it's worth remembering that before the Walkers, Rick had a wife and son. He was a sheriff used to positions of leadership, able to fire a gun, think on his feet and organise people because he could transfer his skills from his old life to his new one. Jim's a bike courier. His parents committed suicide when the Rage virus hit, leaving him with no attachments beyond the people he meets in the events of the film, and no skills to help him survive it. He even seems to be affected by his comatose period more than Rick was. He's physically weaker, more confused, and needs far more help from the group he meets up with before he gets into the swing of things. While this does make him all the more impressive when he does actually get his shit together in the third act, it means that for most of the movie, Jim isn't really defined by being anything beyond clueless, which creates a problem when trying to advocate for him as a survivor. Jim is as much a narrative function to explore the world 28 Days Later as he is a character in its story. To use an documentary analogy again, Jim is not so much part of the wildlife as he is the camera that we're looking through when we watch it. He doesn't even have a canon surname. He's just Jim. And that lack of identity would create a problem when it comes to designing perks for a hypothetical 28 Days Later chapter. What could he actually do that would feel mechanically unique to him? I can't really think of anything, and even if I could, I'm not sure the appetite is really there for Jim to be a playable survivor anyway. The narrative of the Rage saga kind of left Jim behind in the first film. Cillian Murphy is returning for the third installment in the 28 Years trilogy, but seemingly not as the main character, because, again, this isn't The Walking Dead. 28 Days and its sequels are a story about what Britain has become, and Jim is the vessel by which the first film navigates that. But that's all he really is, a vessel. We see him adapt throughout the course of the film to the new ecosystem that he finds himself in, but we already have characters like Rick, Michonne, and even Lara who've done that better. So why not go one step further and look into a survivor who's never really had to adapt to this new world? Because it's all he's ever known. Not a survivalist, but someone for whom the infected and the Rage virus are just a way of life. Someone like Spike. Spike is the main protagonist 28 Years Later and its sequel The Bone Temple, and he is a child of post-Rage Britain. He was brought up on the island of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumberland in a secluded community, safe from the infected. Throughout the events 28 Years Later, Spike goes off to explore the British mainland and finds a totally new world as this already rural environment of northern England has largely been reclaimed by nature. While Jim struggled to adjust to the new world he woke up in, Spike knows nothing else except how to live around the infected the way he was brought up to. And his arc in both the movies, but especially the first, is about finding his own way forward in this new world. Not just learning the way post-Rage Britain works, but unlearning the fears and myths and superstitions he was brought up with. The Lindisfarne community is scared of the world around them and forms an incredibly reclusive society to cope with the horrifying reality of the mainland. And while they are right to be cautious on some level, the town suffers for it. While other settlements exist, the people of Lindisfarne never make any attempt to contact them, and the town doesn't even have a doctor, treating advanced academia and science with a level of suspicion. This is the society that Spike grew up in, and his transition from a sheltered young boy to a resourceful adventurer braving the horrors and the beauty of the mainland is the arc that runs through 28 Years and its sequel. Seeing Spike rise to the challenges of the fog would be a super satisfying way to immortalise the series' first and only true recurring protagonist, although they would have to give him a last name first. And Spike's actor Alfie Williams is clearly already keen to take the role, so getting the likeness and voice work should be easy as pie. And as Alfie himself said, if Stranger Things can have miners as survivors now, I don't see why a 28 Years Later chapter couldn't do the same. But I believe 28 Years Later offers us way more than just Spike, because there's a new breakout character introduced who takes on a mentor-like relationship with Spike and forms a secondary focal point of the Bone Temple. Ralph Fiennes is iodine-soaked eccentric Dr. Ian Kelson. Kelson is a former GP, what you Yeehaw citizens would call a family doctor, who has adapted himself to life under the Rage so perfectly I would almost say he lives in harmony with it. Much like a druid in a fantasy setting might become one with nature through his magic, Dr. Kelson becomes a part of the landscape of post-Rage Britain using chemistry, biology, medicine and philosophy. Disciplines that are so arcane to Spike and the Lindisfarne residents that they may as well be magic. It's certainly done some interesting things to his sanity and sense of self, but Dr. Kelson is one of the most charismatic new characters in the entire 28 Days saga, and would be an indispensable choice for a survivor. Him and Spike both have established entities that could be turned into perks. Spike regularly runs and hides from threats and thrives on being underestimated, so giving him stealth perks or maybe a last man standing mechanic in the style of low profile or soul survivor could be a good idea. And, Kelson's a doctor, and we all know how much behaviour loves making healing perks. Kelson and Spike doubling up in the survivor role would also allow a wide variety of legendary skins if Spike, being a miner, uses the small animation skeleton and frame of the female survivors like Dustin does, while Kelson uses the male skeleton. You could put any female characters like Serena from 28 Days Later, or Spike's mother Isla from 28 Years, onto Spike's skeleton, while Kelson becomes the male alternative if you wanted skins of, say, Jim or Spike's father, in a similar way to how the Walking Dead and Resident Evil legendaries are also split by gender. And that could easily be it. 28 Days Later and its sequels are not particularly known for their antagonists, and the ones they do have mostly just ordinary folks who've managed to manipulate the circumstances of the outbreak to their advantage, like Major West or Jimmy Crystal. And despite how morally disgusting both men are, it's still much more likely that we'd get these types of characters as survivors rather than killers. This is very similar to The Walking Dead's approach, where Matthew Cote has already confirmed that if we were ever going to get Negan, he'd be a survivor, not a killer. And while West and Jimmy are both probably worse people than Negan, I think the same basic principle does still apply here. But one thing that 28 Days Later does have that The Walking Dead does not have is monstrous alternatives that would actually be feasible as killers. The Walking Dead zombies are incredibly slow, only really a threat in groups, and don't have any identifying figures that would make people actually want to download, buy and play them. 28 Days definitely does, thanks to 28 Years Later introducing the Alpha Infected, special infected victims with a particular affinity for the virus. On an Alpha, the Rage virus causes enormous muscle growth, heightened speed and durability, and seemingly a form of instinctual leadership. They don't exactly give instructions or anything, but other infected seem to cooperate with them, coalesce around them, hunt with them as a leader of the pack, and follow up when they attack a target. And 28 Years introduces an Alpha that Kelson has grown used to as a common sight around his living space. Samson, played by Chai Lewis Parry. To put no finer point on it, Samson's an absolute beast. But as soon as I said his name, I'm sure anybody who watched The Bone Temple is going to have some opinions about Samson's role as a killer. So here's where we're going to talk about getting into spoiler territory for the newest movie in the series. It'll be spoiler talk all the way up until the power concept later in the video, so skip to that if you haven't seen The Bone Temple yet. So it's spoiler time in 3, 2, 1. Samson. Samson's role as a killer gets way more interesting given his expanded role in the Bone Temple, because more than any other installment in the series, the Bone Temple treats the infected with a level of identity, dignity and humanity that's genuinely revolutionary. In any other zombie flick, the idea of treating the zombies as individuals with personality and history is mostly dispensed with. But thanks to the old world building from the series' inception, the Bone Temple fully engages with the Rage victims, as people fallen tragically ill with a terrible sickness. Lucky that a doctor is in the house. After spending some time with Samson studying the effects of the Rage while he's under sedation, Kelson understands that the psychological component of the Rage is treatable with antipsychotics, just like any other neurological disease. This results in homebrewed mixes of medicines after a healthy dose of morphine that see Samson transformed, with all the physiological growth that came with being an alpha, but with his memories, speech and mental faculties restored. The film ends with the presumed death of Ian Kelson while Samson lays him to rest, grateful for all he's done to restore Samson's humanity and presumably prepping him for his own arc independent of Kelson in the third movie that's being written right now. Samson's situation is the kind of thing that could only happen in the 28 Days saga. It's very rare that we get a zombie outbreak where the zombies are both unambiguously alive and taken seriously enough to be put through an identity crisis. He exemplifies the sheer artistic integrity and narrative skill Alex Garland has put into this series, but it creates a bit of a problem if we were told to look at Samson as a killer. After all, he's regained his humanity now. If there's anyone infected by the virus who wouldn't willingly kill for the entity, it should be him, right? But in my opinion, there's a narrative snarl here that makes Samson's role as a killer not just more plausible, but all the more tragic for it. Because if Kelson's treatment works anything like the real antipsychotics it's ostensibly made from, you know that those drugs aren't permanent, right? It's very unlikely that what Kelson gave to Samson was enough to permanently cure him of the psychotic element of the rage virus. In the best case scenario, Kelson left a reserve for him, or Samson works out how to make his own from the notes Kelson left behind. Worst case scenario, Samson's had the only dose he's ever going to get. What happens in the third film remains a mystery. Maybe Samson will be able to keep his sanity and find himself a long-term supply of these drugs. Maybe he won't, but I'm comfortable in saying that should he wind up in the realm of the entity, well, when was the last time you saw a chemist shop in the fog? To gain the service of a killer, the entity usually has to do something to fuck around with them, whether that's making a deal, or inducing hallucinations, or torturing them into obedience. But with Samson, all it would have to do is scoop him up and wait. Sooner or later, the drugs given to him by Kelson will subside. The man who we now know as Samson will slip away, regressing into a feral state, and leaving only the rage behind. So that's where we stand. Samson the Alpha as a killer, Kelson and Spike as survivors with other options of legendary characters on top, and perhaps the Bone Temple itself as a map in the Red Forest or Grey of Glenvale realms. But what could Samson do if he was added to the fog as a killer? I'll get to that in a moment, but before we do, let's talk about whether or not a 28 Days Later collaboration would even be on the cards for Behaviour. First things first, I think a 28 days, years, whatever chapter would be a great PR move for Behaviour, that irrespective of how many hardcore fans would want it, it would piss off or alienate basically nobody. DBD's had a fair few divisive licenses lately. Whether they've got too little horror in them, a killer that's almost impossible to effectively adapt into a power, or just a mid-show made by Zionist freaks, and 28 Days Later is a very, very difficult license to hate by comparison. It may not necessarily be to everyone's liking, but the original 28 Days Later is an all-time genre-defining masterpiece of cinema for a reason, and after The Walking Dead failed to deliver fully on a killer or a map worth a damn, there's definitely room to give a second zombie apocalypse story a go with some new characters and a new tone. The franchise is also in amazing shape right now. Beyond the phenomenal initial film, we're in the middle of a trilogy where the first two were insanely high-quality pieces of cinema, and even the red-headed stepchild that is 28 Weeks Later is still a very solid zombie film. It lets down a line of excellence by being merely solid. There's also definitely a will to expand the series by Boyle, Garland and Sony. 28 Days Later has had tie-in comics and a graphic novel, and if nothing else, Alfie Williams is really keen on making it into the fog. So that would be a huge good look for Behaviour. Not just bringing an iconic film series to life in Dead by Daylight, DBD's only British license to boot, but also making a high-profile fan of the game happy by including him as a survivor. The only real obstacle that I see 28 Years Later chapter would be notoriety and name recognition. 28 Days Later is a horror film for horror fans. The film's never been favourites with general audiences, and that's showing more than ever in the box office run for The Bone Temple. Despite rave reviews from audiences and critics alike, The Bone Temple looks like it's struggling to make its money back at the box office, and its predecessor 28 Years Later is the only installment in the series to make over 100 million. This means that unless there's a bunch of secret 28 Days Later fans looking for a game to pick up, the audience for a chapter like this might be more limited than they'd want for a licensed chapter. But the franchise clearly still has some sticking power, and is unlikely to be finished anytime soon. If the third film in the Years trilogy is a success and critics love it as much as they did the first two, I'm sure we'll see a 28 hours later or 28 minutes later prequel story telling the story of the first infection or something. There's plenty of options to continue the series should Sony, Garland and Boyle choose to do so. It may not be a box office titan, but 28 Days Later has proven itself to be a reliable source of quality and artistry over the last 20 years of hard work, and I think that deserves to be rewarded. With that in mind, let me talk you through my power concept for Samson, the Alpha. Samson is a tall killer with sound movement speed and terror radius and the power living pandemic. The Alpha leads the Infected, a group of NPC survivors infected by the Rage virus. The Infected form a group that follow the Alpha around and obey his instinctual commands, and the group has a minimum size of 2, a maximum size of 6, and a starting size of 4. An Infected can be stunned as it peels away from the group to perform a command. Stunning an Infected would cause them to scurry away, reducing the Alpha's Infected count by 1 to a minimum of 2. Hooking a unique survivor or killing any survivor by your own hand will summon one additional Infected if there is room to a maximum of 6. The idea here is to emphasise Samson's role as a vector for the infection and the seemingly instinctual deference the other Infected have towards him for as long as he shares their psychosis. By surrounding him with NPC survivors infected with the virus, it would shift Samson's context seamlessly into Dead by Daylight by having him followed by innocent victims of rage, conscripted by the disease into his service, with him leading them on the hunt without even really realising he's doing it. The Alpha can use the Vecna spell wheel to issue commands to his infected. Each command has a 25-second cooldown. The first command is Scout. One of the infected peels away from the group and the killer controls them. They move exactly as a survivor would with the same movement speed, but have a unique run animation and constantly pant, cough and foam bloody at the mouth to give away their infection. They have no terror radius and can press M1 to attack a survivor. Attacking a survivor, being stunned or returning to the alpha will return control to the killer and reduce the alpha's infected count by 1 as the infected scurries away. The second command is Tackle. One of the infected peels off from the group and runs to the targeted pallet or window within 16 meters. Once they arrive, the infected will vault the window or the pallet, first dropping the pallet if it's undropped. If the vault animation carries the infected into a survivor, they'll be pinned to the ground by the infected for 8 seconds. If the alpha attacks the pinned survivor, the infected releases and returns to the group. If the vault misses or the survivor breaks free of the pin, the infected will scurry away and leave the group altogether. The third power is Scavenge. When Scavenge is selected, the auras of all downed survivors in 24 meters are revealed. When Scavenge is issued, 2 of the infected will peel off from the group and run towards the targeted downed survivor within 24 meters. They'll pick them up before attempting to carry them towards the nearest hook, attacking any survivor that gets in their way as if they were a killer. If the survivor is successfully hooked, 1 infected will scurry away, but if the survivor wiggles free or is rescued, both the infected will scurry away. And the final power is Charge. Using Charge will cause the killer to wind up for 0.85 seconds as the infected fan out to form a line behind him, spaced out 0.5 meters apart from each other. After the wind-up time, the alpha will charge forward at 230% speed for 8 meters, and the infected will run in the exact same direction as him, at 150% speed for 16 meters. If the alpha directly hits a survivor with his charge, he will deal a health state of damage. Each infected that hits a survivor with their charge will pin that survivor to the ground for 8 seconds as if they had been tackled. When charge finishes, half of the current infected that did not pin a survivor will scurry away, rounding down. These 4 powers together are designed to represent the semi-conscious level of authority the alphas have. He might not necessarily be communicating with or instructing them, but they still follow his lead and form a hunting pack with him in the fore. And here's some add-ons to finish up. 28 Days Later is the kind of series we deserve to see in Dead by Daylight someday. It is not the most demanded license ever, or the most lucrative. It's not going to pull in the huge new player numbers that something like, Kaneki or Springtrap did. 28 Days Later is one of the most venerated and prestigious names in horror history, and right now it's going stronger than it ever has been before. The 3rd film in the Year series is in production at the moment, and I think on some level there could be mutual interest generated in a DVD chapter and in the new movie if they were to be released at the same time. One of the reasons The Bone Temple is struggling at the box office when its predecessor didn't is because it was poorly marketed. And if Netflix's Stranger Things is any indication, DVD chapters being used as marketing for their parent IPs is on the cards now. As such, I can think of very few IPs more deserving than 28 Days Later to be immortalised in the fog. And, lucking into a swift with Alfie Williams while playing Alfie Williams wouldn't be too bad either.